değerli konuklarımız. YESET COP27 özel yayın programımız kapsamında gerçekleştirdiğimiz bir başkan etkinliğimize daha hoş geldiniz. Bugün daha önceki yayınlarımızdan farklı bir yayın gerçekleştiriyor olacağız. Günlük özet yerine Mısır'dan canlı yayınımız olacak. Mısır'daki Türkiye Pavilyon'unda canlı olarak gerçekleştirdiğimiz bir panelimiz bulunuyor. Panel etkinliğimizde canlı tartışmamızda YESET Genel Sekreterimiz Serkan Balandoğan'ın moderatörlüğünde gerçekleşecek panel etkinliğimiz. YESET Sürdürülebilir Kalkınma Çalışma Grubu Başkanımız, aynı zamanda Unilever Türkiye, Kuzey Afrika, Orta Doğu ve Rusya Kurumsal İlişkiler ve İletişim Başkanı, Unilever Türkiye ve Orta Doğu Kişisel Bakım Kurumsal İlişkiler ve İletişim Lideri, Sayın Ebru Şener Erim bizimle olacak panelimizde. EY Global Finansal Hizmetler Sürdürülebilir Finans Lideri Gil Lofts bizimle olacak. Ve en son olarak da Unilever'den Global Sürdürülebilirlik Çevre Başkanı Thomas Bey bizimle olacak. COP27'nin ilk haftasını değerlendireceğiz bu canlı panelimizde. Mısır'da gerçekleşiyor dediğimiz gibi. Şu anda ekranlarınızda gördüğünüz gibi aslında canlı yayınımız ufak ufak başlıyor. Önümüzdeki hafta yine canlı günlük değerlendirmelerimiz devam edeceğiz ama izninizle ben sözü şu anda Mısır'a bırakmak istiyorum.
I'm going to make it in the long form because your contributions in your domains are extraordinary, so I don't want to miss anything. So I would like to begin with Jill Lofts, is the EI Global Sustainable Finance Leader. She is responsible for the development and delivery of sustainable finance services across strategy, products and services, risk and regulation, and reporting data. That is key for us. The reporting aspect is what we are trying to develop in Turkey. And you're helping your clients, including many of our members, to create business value from sustainability. And you're accelerating their transition to a low carbon future. So thank you very much for being with us today. We appreciate your presence. And Thomas Lingard, leads climate and environment within Unilever's Global Sustainability team. It's a big accomplishment, and we are experiencing the reflections of it really in Turkey. And Ebru, which I'm going to introduce next, is we're talking about your accomplishments and, more importantly, your vision about the transformation and what Unilever is bringing into this domain to add up to the world's agenda. And including the development of Unilever's new climate and nature strategy that you launched in June 22, you included a recommitment to 1.5-degree aligned science-based targets. That is also key for us. The evidence-based analysis is really important in supporting our claim. We will be really happy to hear your perspective on this one. And you are currently serving as the trustee director of the Unilever UK Pension Fund, board member of Climate Catalyst, a campaign group, and on advisory boards for the We Mean Business and Climate Home News. So much in your plate, but all are contributing to everything. And
no, you're going to have.
And this modest ladies, Miss Ebru Şener is our head of Sustainable Development Working Group in YESET, and she's been contributing to our agenda for such a long time, and we are trying to make an impetus development in this agenda. And also Mustafa Seçkin, CEO of Unilever Turkey, is on our board and is the champion of transformation and sustainable development of our members. And you have the, I guess, longest title and operating in many countries. okay then. So let me. Okay, so that's an opportunity to present our appreciation to you and your company and your colleagues as well to support our agenda as well. So Thomas, if I may begin with you. We've been talking about transformation at the supply chain level and value chain transformation. And we've been following COP27 in many aspects that people are reiterating the importance of this one. How should we perceive this, and what can you do to increase this transformation in the value chains of an international company so that progress can disseminate through all value chains?
Yes, well, it's a huge question. And let's start at the top and work down. So you referenced our science-based targets 1.5 aligned, incredibly important. And of course, that covers our whole value chain, scope 3. And at Unilever, is something like only 2-3% of our emissions are scope 1 and 2, and the rest are either upstream or downstream in the value chain. So really, when we talk about climate action, yes, there's some very important stuff we have to do in our own factories and operations, but so much is either upstream in the agricultural or petrochemical supply chain, or downstream in retail. You know, and when I think of Turkey, I think a lot of how many ice cream cabinets have we got plugged in stores in Turkey? It's like a huge number. In fact, when we wrote our climate transition action plan, we estimated that the emissions from the electricity used to power our ice cream cabinet fleet was actually bigger than our entire global manufacturing fleet for all of our categories, not just ice cream. So, like these kind of, when you do this sort of analysis of where are the emissions and where do you need to be taking action, it's really important. And when you think about things like the cabinets, you know, that's very much out of our control, because we will place a cabinet in a store, and you know, we have no control over that the power supplier or the power supply of that retail shop owner. And so that's why we get super interested in accelerated grid decarbonisation. And you can see, you know, not just Unilever, but other companies making, you know, huge investment decisions now based on the carbon grid intensity of different countries. I think it was Apple actually, in a sort of Far East context, was talking about if the grids don't decarbonize in country X fast enough, then they will move the manufacturing processes to other countries, because everybody is setting these targets to reduce emissions very aggressively, which is starting to, I think, affect investment decisions about where people are citing sourcing. We have to put the ice cream cabinets everywhere. We don't have that luxury because everybody wants an ice cream. But that means we're engaged in transforming grids everywhere, and through campaigns like RE100, which are doing that around the world.
And maybe immediate follow-up question. When we were experiencing COVID and we were talking about digitalization, we checked the SMEs in the country, and we found out that when we were talking about digitalization, we even couldn't achieve automation at some levels. When we come to the climate agenda, and when you focus on SMEs and talking about decreasing emissions, do you see that kind of a lag also that we need to compensate, that we need to leave, so that we should focus more on SMEs to make these targets realized?
Well, suppliers of different sizes that we have to engage is huge. So Unilever's got over 10,000 suppliers. We think about 300 of them are around 2/3 of our overall footprint. But that still leaves a very long tail of about 9,000, many of whom will be SMEs. It is a huge challenge, and of course we all collectively as a business community share that challenge. One of the really interesting innovations in the last couple of years has been something called the SME Climate Hub, which is a kind of global free resource curated academically by Oxford University, but supported by a number of foundations and business NGOs. And it's kind of like a one-stop shop for an SME who can't afford to go and hire lovely consultants to help them out, but are just trying to work through this. They can get all kinds of free resources, templates, guides, best practice to guide them on their journey. So we would direct any of our SMEs to that portal. We're encouraging other companies to do the same, and to really build that up as a global sort of best practice center for SMEs, so that they can also engage in this transition. Because even if those 300 sort of bigger suppliers account for 60%, the other 40% is still really important, even though it's a very long tail.
Thank you very much. And when we come to the finance aspects of this one, and when we talk about a sustainable finance that will help us to realize our commitments that we are updating in the meantime, what would you say that, based on the recent study that you also contributed to, like how sustainable finance can help us fill the gap until 2050? Can you please elaborate on this one a little bit?
Thank you. It's not an easy answer, obviously. It's definitely not a one-sentence answer. I mean, I think financial services have a very similar issue to Unilever, in the sense that probably 90+% of their emissions are their Scope 3 emissions. They typically work across the whole sector, the whole of the economy, and they will have typically a significant amount of SMEs within their portfolio. So similarly, they have to, in order for financial services firms to meet their net zero commitment, then they have to understand the greenhouse gas emissions of everything they invest in, of everyone they lend to, and their transition pathways. So to give you a really, really summarized version, one thing we've realized is that financial services have to understand the sector transition pathway. That's really important, which will obviously be different by country, because that's going to depend on their NDCs. And then they have to understand the corporate transition pathway. Because if they can understand the sector transition pathway and they can understand the corporate transition pathway, they can start to look at the risk and the reward of everybody that they work with. And I guess it's really important for them that they have transition pathways that are credible, that are authentic, and then that the management can deliver on those. And in many ways, that's about the most important thing for financial services with respect to climate transition.
And an immediate follow-up to this one. When you focus on the sectors and corporate transformation, do you also think there's a need to tailor-made and differentiate the financial products that will serve the different needs of different sectors and different corporate entities?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've got a really long way to go here. For mitigation, then I think the purview of financial services that while there's technology risk and transition risk, in essence, mitigation is probably a good investment opportunity, right? But then when we start to look at mobilizing capital to the global south, when we start to look at adaptation finance and climate finance, we have to re-engineer the financial products. And outcomes, societal outcomes, environmental outcomes need to be incorporated into the overall instrument and the overall assessment. It can't just be the financial value because that's not going to work.
There was a comment on this one, like while supporting for adaptation, like even the way that countries are making their development plans matter, because you should decrease the risk by the funds that you are providing on top of everything that has happened after some kind of a disaster as well. So that's an important point that we need to focus also for the business aspects as well, because it's also affecting business continuity and the disaster. Thank you very much for this. And upon everything else, Ebru Hanım, like we've been cooperating for such a long time. We were living this transition in Turkey together. And our colleagues from Turkey knows that the country is preparing the first climate change law and establishing its first emission trading system. How would you elaborate the speed of transformation in Turkey and the happenings that are
I think,
coming as close to the NDC?
Yeah, I think one of the most important step definitely to signing the Paris Agreement by the Turkish government. Even it's a late sign from the government, I think it's an important step. On the other hand, as we as a company started all these commitments and everything under the sustainability by 2010, so we saw that it's an increasing trend from the business sectors that each and every company are very curious about how they can contribute Turkey's climate change. So this is good. I think this is in a good trend that I'm seeing. But on the other hand, I can't say that it's a clear action plan by the government that how we can contribute by the business, because in a sectoral point of view, yes, we are the lucky one as an international company to know that what needs to be done, and we have a short-term, medium-term, and long-term targets. But is this really in line what Turkey is looking for, what they committed about the agreement? I don't know. I can't see this connection in between. That's what I'm super excited to become a sustainable business working group head under the International Association, Investors Association, so which we can help to the government. We can collaborate because we always believe the collaboration between the private sector, investor sides, with the government, with the NGOs to create a better, easy and simple agenda that we can all contribute and do all together, because the government can't do on their own. This is my belief.
Thank you. And it's also maybe affecting the investment decisions of the global headquarters. Like when the sustainability is in the middle of your business decisions, how do you differentiate between countries, or what would you like to see in a country to invest more in that country, is the opinion and perspective of an international investors. So what are the minimum requirements, or what are the trends that you would like to see in a country?
It's a great question. I mean, the overriding thing in most of the transition is around the price of carbon, right? And either sort of putting a price on carbon directly through emissions trading and so on, or removing indirect prices on carbon, negative prices like fossil fuel subsidies, and getting rid of those. So that's got to be a huge part of this transition. And the having climate laws, national plans, things that create certainty in the policy environment for business is super important. I think one of the most divisive things you can see in a country is where climate becomes politicized as an issue, and then you get this swing as different governments come in and out. So actually having stability and recognizing it's not a political issue, not a party political issue, and that countries can, commit long term, regardless of who's running a country at any one time, is really important to business. I think if you, I won't name countries, but there are parts of the world where it's become very politicized and it's more problematic. The UK has been a relatively good example, in terms of having very early established on bipartisan legislation on climate change, which has survived the successive governments. So that's very important. Also the sort of regulatory frameworks around companies. So what you see in the UK now, the UK Chancellor, now Prime Minister, at the last COP announced that every company would be required to have a climate transition action plan. Unilever has been part of the transition plan task force that's been trying to draft the best practice guidance for this that we launched on Tuesday this week. So this is basically sort of standardizing what companies need to be doing, how they need to be doing it. And when you have that environment within a company, within the financial markets in that company, then again, it creates a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that we're all on this journey together. We can build momentum and go faster, because everybody, the reason why everybody's got so much scope 3 is all our businesses are interdependent. So no one company can go to net zero on its own. It has to be a movement. And I think a lot of what we're doing, and a lot of what we want to see in countries, is that sense of a flywheel turning, building momentum towards an accelerated transition.
Thank you very much. And Julian, in your domain, what has developed since COP26? Because sometimes we feel like the world's heard the alarm bell ringing in COP26, just push the snooze button for 1 year, and now trying to realize and try to fill the gap now. But finance is always at the headlights, because when it comes to action, you need to finance it somewhere. Do you think that there's developments in the ambitions and commitments in raising up the finance?
Great question, thank you. So look, obviously we saw the GFAN's announcement at COP26. Since then, now 550 financial services. It was 450, it's now 550 firms that have committed to net zero. And when we think about that, at the beginning of 2021, there were no financial services firms who had a net zero plan. So in 18 months, we've got 550 firms, we've got $150 trillion of assets under management, okay? And now what they're trying to do is, how do you make that real, right? So for GFANs and for financial services, I think last year was a bit of a fanfare, and this year really feels like, okay, let's be serious. What are we doing? How are we doing it? So, the number of firms now that have committed to SBTI, so science-based commitments, who have created and published their interim targets for 2030. And of course, all of those may also seem quite a long way away. So I think what we're really talking about now is, as you said, the UK government have launched the transition, the task force for transition pathways, which, as I said before, is really critical for financial services. The ISSB have launched the revised framework and a new global partnership, which again is brilliant, because financial services does need the disclosures and the reporting, right? Because obviously a lot of how it assesses businesses is around what is disclosed and what is reported. So the fact that there's some movement on that direction is really fabulous. I spent most of this week talking to financial services firms, and I would say what we're looking at now is and this is what they're telling me. There's a wall of money. It's not getting out to the businesses and the projects that need it fast enough. And maybe because there's a lot of governments, there's a lot of MDBs, there's a lot of NGOs, there's a lot of so many parties that they need to deal with to mobilize that capital. So a lot of the discussion we've had this week is how can we get that capital that is there and ready to be deployed? How can we get that deployed more quickly?
And that is one thing that we were talking before coming here, like, do we have a pipeline to spend all this money in the pipeline and projects? And each sector was trying to develop this one, including some common project that is going to serve many companies, big establishment project. Thank you very much for this one. And I'm curious about one thing, like our members also, consulting firms, you have a comparative understanding about sectors and countries. And do you observe some kind of a merger between the capacities and agenda of the countries on the COP targets by their initiatives, or private sector's demands from you to making this kind of transformation? Do you see a global movement on this one in terms of consulting services, demand for consulting services, or it is just going on a slower pace and making us worry about whether we are going to meet the targets or not?
I'm not sure I fully understood your question, but what I would say, I'll say my statement, then you can tell me if I answered. We definitely see regulation and policy as the biggest driver of change right now. So if we look at Europe, that's where we have the biggest demand, because yes, financial services have made net zero commitments and they need to deliver upon them. But there's a lot of EU regulation and UK regulation, and that is driving a huge amount of demand. Now, it's not to say that we don't have demand in the US or in Asia Pacific, but we have about double the demand in Europe. And I don't know if that answered your question.
It is also affecting, this demand is creating some spillover effects to the countries that are operating with the EU and other countries as well. So it is also acting as a catalyst. And when we talk about, and there's an addition.
Within this point of view, so maybe I can also ask you, as she addressed that the regulations are super important and we are very much working with the Green Deal regulations in Turkey. So yes, the government is prioritize very important sectors. They are very big footprints like the textile, aluminum, and the everyone. So do you think that our regulation is fast enough to change Turkey's climate agenda, or what we can do on that?
Now the panel is addressing the moderator. Okay.
I can ask.
Okay, so the glass is half full, half empty. I'll start with the half full one. So there's a trend in Turkey. We are talking about updating the NDC. The ministry is going to announce it next week. And the regulatory framework for coordinating the actions of government institutions is going to be the next climate law that is going to be announced soon. So each government entity is going to have clear responsibility that is going to be stated in this one. So in terms of regulatory framework, that is okay, but everything works on the secondary regulatory support basis. So the law is just going to state intentions, and realizing them is something else. So whenever we incorporate them with the action plans of the government entities, that can be transformed into incentive schemes that is really supporting the private sector, then we are going to be able to see some realization on this one. So, and we see that currently the government institutions are trying to reach to a consensus, because most of them have their own opinions and own standpoints. The energy is another thing, like the supply of energy is crucial. So how do you deal with this supply problem when you are talking about cutting down the emissions? It is one thing, and it is what Europe is experiencing right now. So I remember on 24th of February, in the climate summit in Turkey, which initiated all those studies, we were together with our board, and Minister of Foreign Affairs was briefing us about what is happening in Ukraine. So the day the climate summit ended, we had a different agenda that we were trying to understand and cope with. So that this year was hard for us for many aspects, and that was one of it. So, but we believe that the intention and commitment of the government for this aspect is real, because the progress is continuing, and we are going to see the first outcome of it, and we'll support all parties to make it real. So I
Sometimes-
didn't touch to the
Yeah,
half
no,
empty
I
bottom.
see,
but-
I see. So there's a lots of empty parts, but at the end of the day, I could not so much encouragement from the government to create a collaboration between the competitors. So I'm very much to see that they are trying to punishing if the competitors are becoming to create a collaboration around the climate change targets and so on. So I have some experiences which I can share offline. So I think there is still some tendencies in our mind is not shifted yet. So even we are talking, when it comes to the realization, so everyone is very much keen to tick the box and do what the responsibility is. So hopefully these type of meetings is going to be change our mind shift, because it's not enough for sure. The empty part, which maybe I can conclude your statement, is so much big that I can say.
We feel like we are at the beginning of it sometimes, right? So, and the best practices of our members are always encouraging us to do the same or to do the more. So when we hear more about them, it's really creating an opportunity for us to strengthen our case when we are communicating with the government. Thomas, would you please comment on this a little bit? Like, what are the best approaches and best practices as Unilever you are implementing for supporting this transformation in your company and in your supply chain, so that others can be inspired of and jump in the boat and try to apply the same? Because last year we carried out a webinar series with our members. Even at factory level, solutions were so easy and all feasible, all profitable solutions, and applicable to many industries. Just disseminating the knowledge of it created amazing results. And when you combine it with the best practices, what would you say?
Again, a huge question. I wonder if I could just do a bit of promo for something that launched yesterday, which was an initiative from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I think it's either launched or about to launch, called the Climate Drive, and it's going to be exactly this kind of free, easily accessible case studies of real things that people can do. Very techie, hands-on stuff in factories or in value chains, so that exactly people who've not yet done the easy stuff can find the solutions, and even for the hard stuff, people can say, well, look, here's something we've done, reducing methane from cows or reducing refrigeration leaks in factories. They're very, very practical case studies from big businesses, from consultancies who are sort of sharing these examples freely, because we just need everybody to get moving. And there frankly isn't enough. I don't think there's enough consulting capacity in the world, even if everybody had the money for it, to kind of be supporting every business in every aspect of the transition. So we do need to get this sort of learning and capability up right through the value chain. We've done, I mentioned we've got kind of about 300 of our suppliers that are probably about 60% of our emissions. And we've started to sort of triage those depending on their level of climate maturity in their own journey. And so we've created three categories: some who are just starting out on the journey, some who are kind of, know what they're doing, but are not yet able to give us, if you like, product carbon footprint data, and others who are, well advanced and we can have co-innovation discussions with in a really mature way. And we were expecting to find, more people to the more developed end of that. We found probably 2/3 of the suppliers are actually in that just starting out, really not done anything. We expected to be much higher. So the need for these very basic skills, competencies, learning, access to materials is fundamental. And so we're very interested in any of these tools that can help scale knowledge, information, learning with a very wide group of people.
Please.
And just to add to that, so this is very much on the agenda of banks as well, as you probably know. If I take the UK banking sector or the UK as an example, then SMEs emit about 50% of emissions across all corporates. And the UK banking sector, SMEs are about 65% of all of their clients. So it's a big problem, right? Both in terms of emissions and in terms of client base. So what a lot of the banks are doing, really similar, and we should talk about how to join up the initiatives. They're saying, how can we create platforms to help the SMEs calculate their greenhouse gas emissions, to help them determine what their transition pathways. So effectively, as you're saying, because they don't have the resources to do that. And I think if there are NGOs doing this initiatives and banks and financial services looking at this, that's really helpful. And we should probably think about how that gets joined up.
I just want to share somebody else's very funny anecdote, but I was on a panel with Dexter Galvin from CDP, the Global Disclosure Organization, and he was telling a story of how they'd gone to do some work for the UK's Cabinet Office in government, looking at their supplier engagement. And so they'd gone to all their suppliers to say, we want you to do, disclosure. Turned out one of their suppliers was Barry's Mobile Disco that somebody had presumably hired for an office party. Now, obviously, if you're talking to Barry's Mobile Disco, you can't go in and say, oh, we need to see a climate transition. You've got to make it super simple. Barry needs to buy an electric vehicle, and that's probably it. So making these things super accessible for people who are not the Unilevers or the other big companies or the EYs, and getting to, there are probably 3, 4, 5 things that every business, sort of most businesses can do. You can just put it into plain English and then nudge them towards those actions.
Thank you. And everyone, how would you translate this experience? Like what is happening in Unilever at global level? How it translates to Turkey? Like how it affects your accomplishments? Would you please give some examples about it?
Yeah, many initiatives. I don't want to bore our participants, but just a couple of numbers that I can share. For example, last year, 1.7 million euro investment that we did it. And it was all about the greenhouse consumption reduction, water reduction, waste saving, and so on and so forth in our factories. We have 5 factories in Turkey. So over the last decade, the 2 of them is the biggest investment in Konya. So Konya was chosen very rightly because in the middle of Anatolia. So as we are an FMCG, fast-moving consumer good business, so how we can create a green fund, with a green fund, a green factories in the middle of Anatolia that we can distribute, ideally by the train, which we are supporting the government a lot, to all of our products to Turkey in a much more lower carbon reduction. So that was the thinking behind what we are doing. Many solar energy investments that we are doing in Konya, in Çorlu as well. So green electricity is much more important in our agenda because, as we said that, so do you know where is your big footprint? So how you are going to eliminate this dirtiness in your land from how? So we just put the targets, ice cream business, cabinets, electricity, because these are huge consumption that we are, and there is a very big risk in Turkey in 2023 that there will be a shortage on the electricity that we can't maybe serve our consumers. So we need an alternative systems for the business continuity manner as well. So a lots of things that I'm already telling you that I don't want to bore you. If somebody definitely looking forward to see some details, I can be able to share. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So before concluding our panel, I would just like to ask you one final question. Look, we are all advocating for making this transition work. And for you, Thomas, what is at the top of your agenda? What would be the greatest impacts if it would be succeeded?
I think going back to this sort of collective flywheel building of momentum, because I think you get these terrible conversations sometimes about, oh, well, who's going to deliver the transition? Is it business or is it government? You know, and it's kind of, I think we all have to get better at understanding the way the system works, right? And it's very tricky. It's very tricky being a politician, right? Because the media can be quite unkind, and it's difficult to take hard decisions. And it's very difficult to be a company because you don't want to move too far ahead of competition, too far in a way that might look uncompetitive if the carbon pricing doesn't come in and so on. But I think we have to get more confident and have more collective faith in the idea that business has to sort of take some bold steps. Politicians have to see that businesses are moving and then regulate to bring up the mass of companies who haven't felt quite so brave. And then we create this virtuous, we would call it an ambition leap of kind of action, ambition, and regulation that slowly tightens and moves everybody in a way that's, you know, sound and competitive, you know, as a company and as a country, towards the net zero world we want, because nobody is going to do well in a world that's 3 degrees warmer than pre-industrial levels, and that is where we're heading.
Thank you. And Julian?
Yeah, I totally agree. As I said earlier, there is a wall of money there, and at the moment it's too complicated to get that money deployed effectively and efficiently. So I agree with everything you've said, but somehow we've got to get the private sector, the governments, the NGOs, the MDBs, financial services, corporates, working in a way that this money can get deployed much more effectively and much faster.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think I gave all my messages. So the latest one, collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. That's why we are here. So targeted, very prioritized, simple action plan by each of the companies, by the government, by the NGOs will be very helpful.
Thank you very much. You made it so clear, like, so no one has any excuse of not doing so. Actually, it is that easy, and it's that easy. It's just coming to intentions and overcoming some politics, I guess. Thank you very much for participating in our panel. It was an honor to host you, and thank you very much for your insights on these issues. We would be in touch. We would like to be in touch to benefit more from your expertise with us. And this series, actually, this is the first on-site program, but it is the 5th of a webinar series. And now approximately 50 of our CEOs are watching this show. And I'll also give their feedbacks to all of us so that we can cooperate more and in a more efficient way. Thank you very much.
Looking forward to. Thank you so much, Yarim.
And thank you all for listening to us. Bye-bye.
Tekrardan merhaba. Hem küresel hem Türkiye perspektifini bir arada görebildiğimiz, finans, tedarik zincirleri gibi farklı açılardan değerlendirmelerin paylaşıldığı keyifli bir paneldi. Tüm katılımcılarımıza teşekkürlerimizi bir kez daha paylaşmak istiyorum. Bugünkü etkinliğimizi sonlandırırken sorularınızı ve yorumlarınızı Insight arayüzümüzün sağ alt köşesindeki sekme aracılığıyla bizlerle paylaşabileceğinizi hatırlatmak istiyorum. COP27'nin ilk haftasını tamamlarken önümüzdeki pazartesi günü sabah saatlerine 9.30'da COP27'nin günlük gelişmelerini paylaşmaya devam ediyor olacağız. Bir sonraki ayın gününde buluşmak üzere, hoşça kalın.